Welcome everybody to today's webinar on how to conduct collaborative assessment with the CANS New York via the telephone or the World Wide Web. I'm Susie Button. I'm the director of the CANS New York Institute. Our institute is here to help care managers and their supervisors and their agencies with all things CANS related. I'm going to be co-presenting today with my colleague Joshua Nellis, and he's going to say a little bit about himself.
Hi everybody, I'm Josh Nellis. I'm a policy analyst with the CANS Institute as well as the Parade Foundation.
Thanks, Josh.
So back to you, Susie. Yep.
Thanks. So we're going to talk about a lot today. We have a lot of content in a short amount of time. This is our second time around the dance floor with this webinar. We did this for a few hundred folks yesterday. And what we found was that there was a lot of conversation throughout the webinar. So though we do have Q&A time scheduled for the end of today's webinar, we welcome your questions, and we're going to invite you at some times to give us some ideas and suggestions. And we'll stop at any time for some interactive conversation about folks' questions and input. Here's a little summary of what we're going to be talking about today. We want to remind you about thinking about the CANS New York as something other than a structured checklist, and we'll talk about that in a bit. We're going to give you some virtual work tips and some telephone work tips. We're going to talk about keeping in mind those relationship building interactions when you're doing practice virtually, and give you some special ideas for engaging children and youth when you're doing your work virtually. We'll also touch on that issue of sensitive conversation. How do we collect information on things that are difficult to talk about? And we also want to give you a quick slide on self-care today to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And then finally, Josh will remind you about where you can find us for information, support, and coaching. So David, I see a question already. David Orbach, I'm wondering if you can put that question into Q&A. It's a long one and it's an important one, but I would like to answer that in a little bit. So hold on to that question.
He did actually.
Okay, great, good. Let's keep hold of that to when we get a little further in. Well, so in this environment, right, so if you've ever been in a training with Josh or I or us together, you know that we focus a lot on using the CANS as a support for collaborative assessment, right? That's challenging as it is, but in our current environment, when we have to stay far away from one another, we have to find creative ways to make contact with the people that we serve. And even when we do make contact with the people that we serve, often that's contact with children and we're trying to engage them through a screen. So all of a sudden, right, the challenge level has gone up even further. So today we want to try and give you some tips, some tricks. We're going to run through it quickly to support staying collaborative when you're completing an assessment process. We want to tell you, you're going to all get a PDF copy of these slides at the end of this webinar, so you'll have this reference point. And if there are any tools or tricks that you see on this screen today that you want a color version of or more information about, you'll find out about a way to reach us at the end of today's webinar to get more. So just to start out, before we even get to assessment processes, right, we want to think about how important engagement and rapport building are in this virtual world. We know that we're under a lot of stress and the folks we serve are under a lot of stress. So we want to think about checking in with people before we launch into any to-do list in our client contacts. So first of all, this little diagram reminds us, check in on the basics. Is there anything going on around housing, healthcare, food insecurity, access to basic other needs like clothing, right? That our clients need help with, right? And that basic question, right, that Governor Cuomo keeps talking about is, how are you really, right? How is this pandemic, how is this quarantine, how is this situation affecting you, and how are you? We want to check in with folks about that. Ask them how working from home is going. My colleague Josh can tell you that working with a child or two at home, a young child or two at home, is particularly challenging. And for many of us, and certainly for all of our clients, there's this added challenge of homeschooling. So make sure to sort of run through those things, right? No matter what your to-do list is in a contact, just have a nice check-in, rapport-building conversation about how those things are running for folks that you serve. So now, that said, let's think about collaborative assessment. Let's think about how we get our cans done. Well, we want to change the way you think about that. We want you to remember the items on the Cans New York should not be approached as a structured checklist. They don't prescribe how you get information, but they're rather a sort of a closet organizer to help you organize things once you've gotten the information. So while the items and the domains on the cans can really act as an important tickler system to remind you of the basic information you should have, they're not meant to be asked one by one exhaustively as a checklist. This is you, Josh.
And so as we start to really think about how we can do this, we want to really start by thinking about what are the technology considerations that are at play for us as we try to set up the best possible kind of virtual meeting environment with the kids and the families that we serve. Susie, you can skip ahead to the next slide. So there's a few things that we want to think about technologically first, right? We want to start by thinking about what are the actual technology choices that we have available to use with the kids and families. Many of our agencies pay for specific technologies. We're on Zoom because that's who our employers pay, right? That's what our employers pay for. Yours may use WebEx or other GoToMeeting or other software that's out there, so you might be limited by what's available to you, but you also want to be thoughtful about what is the technology and what are the software programs that work best for the families that you are serving, right? Could it be some of the video chat functions that come on certain phones like iPhones and other devices, right? So you want to be thinking about what works best for the kids and families and talk to them about it. And then once you decide on what's going to be used, you want to coach everyone in how to use it. And it's okay to spend some of that time, especially early on as you're building rapport or starting this new relationship with a family that you've been serving, to really talk about the tech and to coach them through how to use it, how to mute, how to unmute, how to share video, how to turn off sharing video, all the little bits and pieces that they should be thinking about and talking about, right? And research the best ways for them to use it, right? Think about encouraging them to view some YouTube videos that can show them how to use Zoom or use other of the other products, and make sure that they're really comfortable with that. Have them thinking about where does the Wi-Fi drop out in your house if they're using Wi-Fi in their home. Have them think about ways in which they can really access the technology in the best possible environment that they can. And we also want to think about what is the hardware they're going to be using. Is it a desktop, which can't be moved around the house very easily, or will they be on a laptop or a tablet or a phone? Are they thinking about having it charged up before they meet with you, right? All of those things are pieces of the puzzle that we want to be talking to them about and discussing with them. And also we want to be talking about how is that privacy going to be looking for them, right? Will they be able to use headphones, or will they be able to get themselves to a private place within their home? Because we know for some folks that might be easy, for others it might not be. We also want to be then thinking about how do we really educate them around what the nuances will be. Are we meeting with an entire family, and will they all be logged in sort of one session together? Or if we're meeting with multiple members of the family, are they each going to have their own entry kind of into our Zoom or whatever type of meeting that we're having, right? And we want to acknowledge it's going to be different. This is going to be different than when we meet in your living room normally. We want to be transparent about how the tech might influence the conversation, right? Privacy might not be as possible as it normally is. We might not be able to walk down to the coffee shop so that we can have that deeper conversation. And so we have to think about how this is going to influence the way this goes. We want to always be checking in about the quality of the connection. Just because you can hear well now doesn't mean you're going to hear me well in 10 minutes, right? We have to be thoughtful about our own dropouts from Wi-Fi in our own homes and make sure that we have good connections from where we are having our half of the conversation. We also want to be talking about the fact that virtual meetings are going to be more emotionally and intellectually draining than an in-person session will be. And that's on both sides of the conversation, right? That's for the kids or the parents with whom you're meeting, and that's for you as well. So we want to acknowledge and be thoughtful about how long are our sessions going to be? And are we giving lots of opportunities for breaks? Are we giving everyone an opportunity to say, you know what, we said we were going to go till 2 o'clock, but really I am just fried. I'm done. This is hard for me. My eyes are strained from looking at the screen, and there's people running around, and somebody just knocked on the door. I just need to be done for today, right? And give people that opportunity. And we want to also be thinking about, and we'll talk more about this in a few slides, what can people be doing during the meeting? Oftentimes we need something else to do. We need a tchotchke to play with. We need a game to be playing, especially for kids, right? We need something to be doing with our hands so that we can stay in and focused. And again, you're going to hear us say this many times throughout this webinar. Talk about breaks. Make sure everyone knows breaks are allowed. Schedule breaks in if you're planning a longer session. Make sure everyone knows they have an opportunity to just push pause and take that break, be it for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or even until tomorrow or next week. A few additional things that we want to talk about is we need to recognize, as many of you are well aware, we have ethical considerations and we have privacy considerations that we have to honor for our families that we serve. And just because we are all stuck at home a lot, just as they are, doesn't mean that we still don't take those things very serious. So privacy is important, so are boundaries, and that includes your boundaries. Where in your home are you having your half of these conversations? Are there kids? Susie mentioned, I've got a 6-year-old home with me right now. I've also got a 1-year-old, and I have a spouse who works in a hospital, so she's gone most of the time. So for me, I always have to be thoughtful about that. If I'm having a private conversation, how am I encouraging the other kids in my house to be safe, but also supervised and sort of out from underfoot so that I can have serious conversations with people, right? Think about developing clear signal words with the kids and the families that you're serving. So if they don't feel safe or they don't feel that privacy is available to them because a sibling walked in or a parent walked in, you can give them something to say that won't necessarily tip off the other person that there's a problem, but let you know that we're going to take a break from the serious stuff right now, right? It could be as simple as if you need me to take a break and let me know that you're not, that things are not private for you anymore, just start talking to me about Transformers, or start talking to me about your Legos, or start talking to me about that TV show that we both like, right? You talk about Dancing with the Stars or something, and that'll be my clue to know you don't feel safe right now, and that's okay, right? So if you use signal words or signal phrases, we want to keep in mind that our communications are never 100% secure, right? As more secure as things like Zoom are becoming in this new world that we're all using these products nonstop, we still know that Zoom bombing is a thing. We still know that sneaking into a meeting or clicking on the wrong link or putting in the wrong code is possible, and people could purposefully or accidentally be popping into our meetings. And so we want to make sure that we're using all those security features those products have, but also keeping an eye out on the list, on the panel, right, to see if anybody popped into a meeting that we weren't expecting. Again, use all those features that are available. Unique meeting codes. Don't use your sort of public code like that Zoom gives you or that other products might give you. Lock the entrance. Use the waiting room features if your products have that. And be sure that you are assigning a password when necessary, or using registration features if that's something that you want to use. But really think about the security features available and make use of them. And make sure that the kids and families know that you're doing that, right? So give them that peace of mind to know that we are going to be using and providing that safety. And also keep in mind that our devices make it easier for us to get into meetings sometimes. So for instance, I have several iPads around my house, or one iPad in particular that is logged into my iTunes account, but my child can use it, right, for some of his educational games and to watch videos and things like that. So on that device, I do not have any of my work products installed. I don't have Zoom installed on that device, right? So he could never accidentally, by picking up that device, get into this meeting or other Zoom meetings that are on my calendar, right? So be thoughtful about what devices have what software, and making sure that you're keeping that as secure as possible to a device that you alone will be using, or locking it down if someone else is going to be using that device.
Thanks, Josh. So Josh has covered some of the special considerations for when we're working virtually the way we are now, when we can see, well, you can see us, and often when we're in our Zoom meetings, we can see one another. But let's talk a little bit now about special considerations when we're working solely via the telephone. This is a place where we can't see our clients and they can't see us, and we have to rely very heavily on verbal connection to support a collaborative environment with them. So here are some tips and tricks for making purely telephonic contact work. First of all, you really have to keep in mind that all the cues you naturally would give to people must be delivered verbally. So that's easily said, but not so easy to remember. Here's an example. If I'm about to change the subject with someone, I often move in my chair, or if I'm going to interrupt somebody, I may lean toward them, open my eyes, lift my eyebrows. If I'm on the phone, I have to actually say, is it okay now if we shift gears and talk about a different subject? Or is it okay if we move on to the next section of the conversation around our assessment? We also have to make sure that we deliver cues around whether or not people feel heard verbally, right? So we need to take our time and focus on giving people those engagement supporting communications. Wow, I really hear things seem to be going really well this week, and last week things were so stressful, but you really feel like you're getting a handle on it. Or, yes, I hear that. Can you tell me more? Or, oh, can you say that again? I didn't quite hear the last part of that sentence. We need to make sure that we are verbally giving the same kind of feedback we would give one another non-verbally, and that we would give our clients non-verbally. You can also think, if you have virtual and telephonic access to the same client, you might want to do less sensitive and more routine work via the telephone, right? Save the virtual time for assessment and engagement, and use the telephone to do things like explaining what the tool is for, teaching the action level language, and then assigning sort of pre-assessment homework by telling the member and the caregiver to think about the needs and goals that they might be shaping in their head around each domain area. We're going to show you just in a minute some visual supports you might think about providing your clients ahead of time. We have rating sheets and flow charts of the action levels, cheat sheets that define the action levels, and even some emoji style cards for kids that you could actually email or snail mail your clients, so that you're working from a common reference point if you're not having visual contact. Listen carefully on the phone. Make sure that you let each person answer each question. Feedback a summary of what they said in action-oriented language. So, if mom says, I think his behavior has gotten a lot better, but I still want him to work on sitting down and doing his schoolwork in the morning, then you can say to Jimmy, how do you think you're doing with listening to mom and focusing on your schoolwork? And then if Jimmy says, I'm doing good too, then you can say, wow, it sounds like you're all seeing real improvements in Jimmy's behavior. But you want to do that in a sort of a paced, slow, timed way in which you're making sure everyone has a chance to give their input. Again, right, we're going to say this on every single slide. Take frequent breaks. Check in between questions, in between content. Family members, do you need a break? Youth, what am I saying? What are we talking about? Family, how's that young kid doing with this conversation? And then break into things like, breaks don't even have to be stopping. They can be just stopping and talking about, as Josh said, that fun TV show, or tell me what your puppy is doing right now, or look out the window and tell me what you see. So one thing we said in the previous slide was that we want you to think about taking your time, having each person take a turn, and then reflecting back caregiver and youth priorities in action-oriented language. So here are some examples of how you might do that. You might say to somebody who's talking about prayer being a real help to them in this stressful time, based on what you're telling me, I think we can really use your sense of faith to help you make some changes happen. So listen carefully to that language. It's identifying a strength. Spiritual and religious beliefs are a strength on the cans. And it's also saying, wow, we're going to think about using that to make change. You're telling me that finding safer housing is goal 1 for you. This is a little bit different than just reflective listening. This is reflecting back what the priority of the caregiver or the youth is in a way that talks about forward motion. It sounds like school is a place where you want to focus our work. You really want to focus on getting along better with your friends. Or for a younger child, you want help making more friends. We talked a minute ago about providing visual supports. And Josh is going to walk you now through some different tools that we recommend and that we can make available to you if you want to snail mail or email some visual supports around the CAN's action level language.
So we have a few different examples and ways that you can present the information around the action levels to the kids and families. And as Susie said, you want to encourage folks to have access to this ahead of time through email or snail mail. And then you can also, of course, share your screen and put this on into your meeting with the kids and families. This is one example. We actually have started using a similar slide to this in our live trainings where we're teaching the CANs, right, which is the 4 action levels, and it allows us a chance to put both needs and strengths right on there, right? You see on the bottom in the black text, the no evidence of need and no need for action. So we're talking about both the function and the action necessary at each of the levels, and it takes you right up the 1, the 2, and the 3. And then we do the same thing on the top in the blue text with the strengths, right? Starting at 3, which is our no strength identified, and then working our way towards our 0, which is those centerpiece strengths. And so this is language that's obviously written more for providers, but could potentially be very effective to use with kids and families, or could be edited. You could use this graphic, but then change the language on here into language that you think would best meet the needs of the kids and families that you're serving based on what you know about them so far. And there's different ways to represent this, right? So on this next slide, a lot of people tend to like this slide a bit better. It's a bit more colorful and cheerful and lets us think about, right? Think about those levels in a different way, but it's the same idea where on the left-hand side, you've got our action and function statements around needs. And on the right-hand side, you have those action and function statements around strengths. And again, the text might be modified based on the words and phrases that you think will best communicate these ideas to the kids and families you serve, but it's a great way to really visually see that. Beyond that, we also have our flow charts, right? Our decision trees. Again, this is sort of written with the provider in mind, but a flow chart like this could be really effective and really effectively used with a kid and with families. And again, you might change this text to make it a little more simple, a little more developmentally appropriate based on who you're speaking with, but the actual flow chart still applies, right? And helps us to sort of ask a few key questions that can get us to the action level that makes the most sense. So you see the one for needs here. We have another for strengths that's right here. And these are documents. And again, you'll get all these slides at the end of this training. You're going to get an email with this, but these are actually available in several different places. And we'll talk about our Institute website where you can download stuff like this at the end in case you don't know about it. But docs like this are available in many places. Something like this is a great tool that can be used, especially with younger children or people that really just don't sort of see things in text, but really need to kind of have a more tactile approach. You could send a PDF, this document ahead of time. And for families who have access to a printer, they can print this out, or you could even mail these to them ahead of time, right, with the numbers already cut out. And they would have the opportunity to actually pick up and actually show you on screen as you talk about some of the items on the cans and talk about some of the needs and strengths, and you teach them a bit about what the green, the yellow, the red, or the purplish, and then the red mean, right? You could have them really understanding that idea, and then sharing those cards right up on the screen could be really effective for kids or caregivers who are not real great at communicating verbally, but want to sort of get their thoughts across. This is another great example. This could be really effective for some of our younger, or at least developmentally younger clients that we serve, right? Where we're really breaking the action levels down to kind of very simple faces and thoughts. And then on the back side of these cards, you'll see, or these sticks, I guess I should say, that on the next slide, this is the back side of those, which then has the action level numbers. And these were actually created by Barry Wexler, who's one of our regional leads in the CANS Institute, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. But she just made these with some of the tools that she had available. She's a former preschool teacher and director, and so was really thinking about what would apply to kids at that sort of younger developmental level, right? And so this could be a great way to help bring them into that conversation. So any or all of these could be tools that you could effectively use with kids and families, and would help break down some of those distance barriers that are up right now, but allow them to really communicate back to you using action level language that makes sense to them and helps us overcome those tech barriers.
Thanks, Josh. I just want to double back, because we're talking about action levels, before we go on to the next slide, to the question in the question and answer box. it's unclear to me if the question is a data capture question or an assessment question, but I'm going to read it out and answer it in both ways. This participant said, how can we capture the result of individual items on the CANS New York school boards for all of our patients so we can load those itemized structured data into our EHR to track and prompt addressing needs without a PDF? And so there are two answers I'm going to give you to that question. The first has to do with translating a conversation about action into action levels. You don't need to use the numbers to be able to collect the numbers on an individual basis. So here's an example, if we go back and forth between these two slides, right, of sort of a visual representation of a 3, that's the really unhappy face, a 2, that's a sort of unhappy face, a 1 meaning I'm going to keep thinking about it, and a 0 meaning it's really a-okay, right? That concept, right, if we move on now to the numbers, how those things track onto the numbers is workable as long as we start with transparency. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, and make sure our clients understand that what the conversation means, right? So we can translate action into numbers through conversation, or just have a conversation about action and rate the numbers. On the data capture question, that is a bigger question. So we are not going to cover data capture or data analytics in today's webinar, but what I do want to say is that we are available. You're going to get our email later, and we're happy to get on the phone with you or your data folks and talk about analytics and data capture and provide some quick consultation and technical assistance about that. So we're going to shift gears now, right? We've talked about that action level language, and we've talked about virtual and telephonic work, but we always want to think with collaborative assessment about the fact that the assessment process in a collaborative paradigm should really develop and strengthen your relationship with the child or the youth in the family. And we want to think about how to apply that in a virtual context as well. So let's just go through a few things that are really important around virtual contact for the quality of your relationship with the folks that you serve. The first is something that Josh already touched on earlier in the webinar, and that is that your virtual meetings and your conversations are professional. Why do we work on this on the relational slide? Well, because sometimes when we're relaxed in our own home environment, we can sort of forget about switching gears and making sure that we're putting that role modeling forward of safe, engaged, genuine, but professional behavior. So where you are, what you're wearing, the noise level around you, how you're responding to the activity around you is all important to think about when you're building relationships virtually. And again, we've talked a lot today about signals. Visual, verbal, and physical signals are important. You'll see me nodding my head as Josh is talking. I don't think Josh cares that I agree with him, but I want him to feel supported while he's training, because I know he can't see any of your faces and he doesn't have that normal in the room training feedback. You want to provide that same kind of visual encouragement when you're working virtually. One thing to really think about is that an alert posture, sitting up just as you would in your office or in a meeting, is a really important, respectful way to engage with folks virtually. And also looking at your camera. So I'm just going to show you, right, that if I look at my camera, it looks like I'm looking at you, even though I actually can't see you. But if I look down at my paper that I'm working from while we're talking, it really looks like I'm disengaged, right? Use strong reflective language. Consider moving your camera to eye level. Let me demonstrate this for a minute. I have my camera up on a little platform, and actually it's just 2 reams of printer paper. It's not a fancy platform. But if I take my computer and I put it down on my desk and I'm looking down at you, it feels a little bit less engaged. You might be distracted by what's behind me or something in the room, right? And so when I set up my camera to make sure that engagement with you as the audience is primary, right, that really helps the meeting or the training go well. It's going to help you when you engage with your clients. That's a little harder when you're working on your smartphone, which some of you are doing, right? So that's where can I sit? Where can I place my cell phone in a way that works for the client? Slowing down is critical with these virtual meetings. We've been talking about this a lot, right? But when we're engaging in relationship building virtually, we want to start out every meeting with a long look and a lot of listening. We do that I don't know if folks have noticed that about professional meetings, but folks have really slowed down and are doing a better job connecting with each other. We want to do that with our clients as well. And again, we're going to say this again and again and again and again. Take frequent breaks. You're trying to build a relationship with a child and you're trying to build a relationship with their caregivers. You want to understand that just the fact of engaging in this way is mentally tiring. And if we push too long and too hard, we're actually taking away from our relationships. And then we also want to think about that soapbox that everybody who's been in a training with me hears me talk about. And that is that in order for things to work well around collaborative assessment, transparency must be our first priority. It builds the foundation for safety, relationship building, trust, and an effective assessment. And it becomes even more important when we're working virtually. So be sure before you launch into an assessment to introduce the tool, the CANS, what it is and what it's for. We're going to give you some examples of that in a minute. Consider providing that visual, those action level diagrams that we showed you a few minutes ago, or the rating form ahead of time. In a few minutes, Josh will show you some poll technology that you could use if you're using Zoom or GoToMeeting or WebEx that can help people stop and think and slow down. Be transparent about what the tool is for. Sometimes you're conducting a reassessment virtually. In this case, you can stop and remind the youth and family, this is just that same process that we did 6 months ago. It hasn't changed. We're going to review the information. It's just sort of a different way of connecting to one another, and we're going to make changes as needed. Making sure that people know what you're doing has to be pretty specific, and so that's why we can't say it enough. Educate the youth and family about what those action levels are in a language that's meaningful to them. This is just an example. 0 is it's not a need. 1 is let's keep an eye on it. I used to say let's check on it. 2 is let's make a plan for action. And 3 is can we do something right away? Those are examples of ways that you can start teaching a shorthand language to the client that helps you work together more effectively. Remember, don't launch into any area of discussion until you've explained the why of it. Why do you need to know about the caregiver needs and strengths? Well, you might frame it as it helps me to know about the supports that you need to be the caregiver that you want to be, and what are some of the barriers for you? What gets in the way of that? Why are you asking about substances or trauma? Focus on forward action as the reason. We're going to ask you some questions about some scary situations that a lot of kids I work with have experienced. The reason I'm asking you is because it helps me figure out the best path forward with you if I know if any of those things have happened in your life. Consider telling folks ahead of time in brief what the areas of assessment that you're going to be talking about are. Ask them to tell you once they have that list, what's the most important area to start with. This does 2 things. It's transparent, and so it empowers them to start thinking about and making decisions about important information. But it also creates a sense of, oh, okay, I know what's coming and I know why, so I don't feel blindsided when someone starts asking me about difficult information. And finally, always check in at the beginning when you're preparing people for the assessment process, excuse me, about the fact that part of the assessment will include talking about sensitive information. Let people know we're going to be talking about that at some point, and when we do, you can take a break at any time, and remember our safe words, and remember that you can schedule a separate meeting with me if you want to talk about this stuff with me independently or privately. Josh, can you take this one for me?
Absolutely. So again, as we're working with the families, as Susie really already kind of talked about in that last conversation, we want to be thoughtful about what is the shorthand that we're developing for those action levels, right? And I mentioned that a bit earlier, talking about how can we take some of these visuals, but also tweak the language to really meet the needs of the kid that we're serving, meet the needs of the caregivers that we're serving. And so we really want to start any conversation around the CANs, not necessarily with simply diving into, okay, let's go item by item through the CANs, but instead by talking about what the CANs is and what it isn't, right? That it's the product of your story. It's not actually an assessment tool by itself. It's not actually a questionnaire by itself, but it's a list of items that kind of help reflect the various areas of need that we know kids and families can experience. And so we want to talk to you about what levels of help do you need on some of these kind of key areas, right? And we want to use the language and be thoughtful about how we explain the tool in language that makes sense to the kids and families that we serve. And so we're going to go through a few slides here that are going to cover some ways that we can do that with caregivers, some ways that we can do that with kids. You want me to take this one too, Susie?
If you want to, I'll check on my sound while you take this one.
Sure. So there's these next couple red slides are talking about, here are some ways that we can be thoughtful about how we're going to explain the tool to caregivers and to even maybe potentially some of the older teens that we serve who have like a high level of understanding of what we're talking about. So we're going to use a tool called the CANs to help focus our work. I want to teach you the words that can go with the tool now, right? So we're actually going to talk a bit about what are the words that we're going to use and the ways in which we are going to talk about this tool. And so go ahead, Susie, and click on the next one. So next I might then say, the CANs tool is a guide for helping you to find out what you need and what you want to work on most. And it also helps us to talk about your child's strengths and your strengths. And those are equally important to our work. And that's really kind of a critical piece there that we're sharing, right, where we're talking about, especially with caregivers, when we're talking about their own strengths and their own needs, that it gives us that chance right off the bat to really introduce what that caregiver section is meant to be, right, which is a reflection of their capacity for parenting. And when we talk about their needs and their strengths as the caregivers, we're not talking about their needs and strengths at every facet of their life. We're talking about their needs and strengths through that lens of parenting. Are there areas that you might have some need in order to meet your child's needs, in order to be the best parent that you want to be? And it really helps us to create that level setting early on by being thoughtful about what the tool is and isn't before we even dive into actually doing any types of assessments. And so now we're going to ask you guys to participate a bit, right? We're going to use the chat button here, the chat feature, because this will allow everybody to see your responses. And we're going to take a little pause here, and we're going to ask you, what are some of the ways that you have found that really help you to describe the CANs New York and the assessment to the caregiver? We want you to share a bit and put that in the chat so that we can all see and kind of dive in a bit. What are some of the tips and tricks that you have for us and for your colleagues here, the other 362 folks that are participating right now? What are some of the ways in which you explain the CANs and the action levels and the tool to caregivers? Go ahead and chat that in right now. We're gonna go silent for a minute here and let you bring that in.
So someone is saying that they tell clients that this helps us find out what your strengths are and how I can help, what I can help with. Melissa is saying information gathering, it's an information gathering tool to best utilize the services I can connect you and your child with. Katasha is saying, I put it into better words, that it's more understandable. I explain that this is something that, Katasha, that this is something that shows the areas you exceed at and some areas you struggle with. It's well said. Michelle is saying, this assessment guides me when we're trying to update or create a plan of care. It lets me know the referrals that might be needed to best support you and your child. That's lovely. Kelsey said, I try to explain that the CANs is a tool that we use to get a good picture of where the child and family are at the current moment. Also a lovely way to say it. Venica says, I let them know it's sort of a report card that we use to assist with their needs and provide assistance. And Alyssa says, this is a way for me to get to know you and your family better so I can write the best care plan possible to help them. Caitlin says, this is an assessment that helps guide our planning, highlighting the strengths and areas we need to work on. And Frances says, it's an assessment to help see what I can help you with and the things we can work on together. Beautiful. These are all wonderful ways, and lots of you are putting in great suggestions And these are all wonderful ways of talking collaboratively. And I also hear a lot of humility in these responses. It's going to help me collaborate with you. It's going to help me follow your lead. Lovely, lovely ways to introduce the tool. Here's another one I like. Michelle, I explain it's a tool that helps me paint an overall picture of how I can develop a plan of care and better assist you and your family. Someone else, Soleil, says, in the past, I haven't expressed that I'm completing a CANS. Instead, I just bring up the questions casually, and then what questions aren't answered, I bring up over time. And Soleil, I would support that approach to the assessment, but I would make sure that you do also some kind of conversation about the CANS. You don't even need to say it's the CANS, but that we're going to focus on the things that you say are the highest need. Bernadette says, she introduces it by saying, I'm wondering what your life is like and how we can best work together to help you and your family be your best. Nice. Here's another one. Morcha says, it's a scoring chart to gather strengths and needs, and I use it so I won't miss any information that would help me help you in the plan of care. Great, great input, guys. So Josh, you want to do this one?
Yep, so let's think then a little bit about shifting gears for these blue slides. We're going to be thinking about what are then some ways that we might shift our language or use a different tone in explaining this to kids, right, as we're actually working with the children that we serve. So again, very similar really in a lot of ways to how we might describe to adults, right? Part of my job is helping to figure out some parts of your life where you might want help, right? I use a tool to help me keep track of what you want. So on this tool, you might give me some responses when we talk about parts of your life, right? I might bring something up and you might say, I don't need any help with that. Or you might say, I can usually manage this myself, right? Or you might say, you know, I can use some help. Or you might say, I really need help right now, right? And so I put those numbers in there on this slide for you folks to really be kind of cluing into what are the numbers associated with those action levels. But we don't have to use those at all with the kids if we don't think that that's relevant to them. The numbers are simply just a way for us to organize our thoughts on sort of the computer and paper side of this. But really what we're talking about with kids is action and the needs that they have, right? And we can do that with strengths as well. So here's what that might look like, right? And it's the same kind of a conversation. You know, we want to start by explaining, why do we explore strengths, right? So the great thing about strengths is that you can use them to overcome the challenges in your life. And so I want to bring up a few parts of your life and I want to talk to you about how they might help you overcome challenges, right? And so I might launch into that with some of the kids that I work with and say, you know, tell me about your friendships. Tell me about how easy it is for you to make friends, how it is for you to keep friends, and do those friends help you, like when you have challenges at school or in the neighborhood or dealing with problems, right? And then I give them some options, that, right, not really, or sort of, but not all the time. Yeah, most of the time my friends are really helpful to me, or yes, like my friends and the friendships that I have, those are so important to me, and my life is all about me and my friends, right? And that's our centerpiece strength, our zero, right? So we can do that with both strengths and needs, and we can really dive in. And then, so next what I want to do is get a sense from you guys. Again, same kind of question we just asked you with regards to caregivers. How might you make this tweak with the kids that you serve? How might you really explain what it is you're doing and why you're having this conversation? Or if you do dive in deeply into the tool itself and really share with them, you know, the rating form for the CANS, how do you do that? So how do you have some of these conversations with the kids that you serve? So go ahead and put some of that into the chat box right now. So another actual advantage that we have in sort of this online world that we don't necessarily have when we're sitting face to face with a child is we can use the technology to our advantage, right? So we can actually use the poll functions that many of these pieces of tech have available to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the poll feature in Zoom to launch a poll for you right now. So most of you are going to see a pop-up on your screen. It'll have a green bar at the top, and then it'll have some questions down below. If you don't see it, you might have to click on the poll button, which should be appearing on the bottom of your Zoom window, but hopefully for most of you, it's popping up, right? So this is an example of how I might do this with a kid and family. So these questions are for you. So question one is, given the current state of the world, how effective do you feel you are in managing your children's schedules on a daily basis. And I know some of you don't have children. If you don't, feel free to rate your effectiveness at managing your own schedule for the sake of this poll, right? And then question 2 is going to be, think of a child who you are serving or one that you're raising. So either some of the kids you work with or some of the kids that are being raised by you at the moment. How do you feel he or she is doing in school? And we gave you some options for how you're going to rate that. So I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds to fill in that poll before I close it. And also, encourage you to continue when you're done with the poll to continue chatting in with your thoughts for how you explain the cans or explain the action levels to the kids that you serve. I'll give you about 20 more seconds on the poll before I close it and just show you how I can share those responses back. I'm going to end the poll and then I'm going to share the results with you right now. So now you should be seeing hopefully a pop-up that shares the results as you guys rated them, right? So what did I do here? I actually asked you in question 1, a question that doesn't necessarily exactly line up to any specific item on the cans, but actually gives me really valid information about a number of items on the cans, right? So question 1 was really about the caregiver domain. I'm thinking about the organization item, right? How are we all doing organizing our own children's schedules right now, right? I have a 6-year-old, and I would probably rate myself a 2 for this right now. I'm having some struggles, right? I'm having some problems. So it's that third one as you see that come up, which we had about 6% of you also rate, right? I'm having some troubles. I can use some help organizing my kids' schedules and how that interacts with my own schedule while I'm trying to work from home, right? And this might also be giving me a clue to ask more questions around parenting stress, right? Some people that are having organization challenges might also be having some parenting stress challenges. So I'm not asking a specific item, but I'm asking a question that gets me to some of the items and what might be relevant to their capacity to parent their child, right? Item number 2 is doing the same thing. We're thinking about that school and academic section without necessarily diving into any one particular item, right? So I'm saying, think about the kids that you serve or your own children. How are they doing in school right now? And so the responses that you give might help me as a care manager or a practitioner of the CANs to start thinking about some of those individual items, right? Well, tell me a bit more about why you think your kid's starting to fall behind, right? Because that tells me school achievement might potentially be rated for action. It also maybe tells me that there might be some relationship building that has to happen between you and the school, given this sort of new world of COVID education, right? And so I'm starting to think about several of the items. I'm starting to think maybe even about school attendance. Is your kid able to participate every day in the online offerings, right? Many of us, through the luck of natural selection and the privilege that we're afforded, have great opportunities for our kids to be connected technologically to school every day, but many families do not, right? And so I'm going to start asking some of those deeper questions and start thinking about some of those items that might be rated for action on the CANs, right? And if you're telling me my kid's doing pretty well, right, that first item on there, which 37% of you did, then it tells me I probably don't need to dig too deep into school and academic, and I'm going to, kind of push forward to other areas and other parts of assessment that I think are going to be more relevant. I'm going to take that share down now. And so just to back up, a few things that folks have been chatting in, some of you mentioned it helps you address the services in your plan of care, right, which is great. You're tying that in. That was Mary Jane who's talking about really tying in this assessment tool with the plan of care. It helps me address what the most important areas in your life, right? Kyle said the action levels help me describe different areas of your health and address separately in order to prioritize the highest and lowest needs that you might have. Morchi, and I apologize if I'm butchering that name, it helps explain that it's not any sort of judgment, which I love, right? This is not a judgment tool. This is a tool for identifying need and identifying action that needs to be taken about those needs. So we talk about your need and the experience of children in similar ages or circumstances. That's normalizing. We're going to talk about normalizing in a few minutes and how we can use that as a really powerful tool. So thank you all for that participation. And I think, Susie, you're up for this next part, or is that me? Nope, that's me. Sorry.
Still you.
Just looking at my notes. So let's talk about that a bit more then. How does this virtual work then really work with the kids? How is this type of meeting, for which I assume everybody on this call right now is an adult, how might this look a little different with a child on the other end. And many of us who have our own kids at home and are observing those online classes from, kind of nearby are probably learning a lot about this. I have learned a lot about approaches that I like and approaches that I don't appreciate from some of the teachers of my own children, right? So as we think about, go ahead to the next slide, yeah. So as we think about working virtually with kids, it starts with preparation. We talked about the technological preparation earlier, but we also want to be thinking about the sort of behavioral preparation, right? Does the kid have something to do? Do they have a comfortable place to be? Are they prepared for any diversions that might come up? Do they have a cat, or do you have a cat that's going to jump on your lap? If so, you might want to bring it up to the screen ahead of time, because during a real deep part of your conversation, when you're making great progress, that's when little Spot's going to jump up and be on camera, and you want the kids to be ready for that, right? And let them know if there's going to be diversions at all from your side or from there. You want to be thinking about where is the camera positioned on both ends, and help them be comfortable and not be sharing any parts of their home or any areas in their house that they don't want to have on camera. For instance, my child this morning, while I was in the bathroom, picked up his laptop in his online class and was knocking on the door to the bathroom trying to get in, and I'm very glad that I locked the door. Right, so we want to all be thoughtful about that. What are the private places? What are the okay places to be on camera and be sharing? We want to think about how can we interact creatively. Can we use online games? Are the kids developmentally able to use those games? Do their parents approve of those games? But also, are there activities or crafts that we can have set up ahead of time, right? Can we be in contact with mom or dad or caregivers, whomever they may be, and talking about, hey, here's a craft activity. Are you capable of printing this out, or can I send this to you via snail mail so that little Susie has it for next week, right? Do you have any crayons or markers, or can I send a few along? Can we do an activity together while we talk? Right, and be thinking about what's developmentally appropriated. It's okay to be animated, right? It's okay to bring in the energy. The younger the kid, generally, the more energy you need to bring to keep them engaged. So don't be afraid to be doing that. Use those visuals, right? We shared a bunch of those earlier. Kids love to hold up cards to the screen, whiteboards. My 6-year-old's teachers use a lot of whiteboard activities where they encourage kids to use whiteboard and hold up their answers to the screen. It's a great way to communicate back and forth. Don't be afraid to use all of those tools. And remember and think developmentally, right? The way you speak to caregivers is not necessarily the way you're going to speak to children. Think about what their developmental age is, not just what their physical age is, and think about the ways in which they communicate best, and set yourself up for success by really being thoughtful and sort of having some of the ways in which you want to ask those questions prepped ahead of time. Even write down your own notes if you need to. Get ready for diversions, use them, take advantage of them when you can, and just recognize that you're probably never going to get through everything you wanted to get through in a particular session. And we know that we're going to allow breaks and give breaks whenever possible, but just recognize that this is a challenging way to do the work that we do, and we need to give ourselves the space to be okay with making as much progress as we made that day, right? And then again, continue to check in, audio, video quality, check in on those things. I don't know if you were all experiencing it, but earlier when Susie was speaking, she was breaking up a lot the way it was coming through to me. I texted her privately, right? We switched up our plan a bit, and I took some slides that she was going to take while she addressed that. We recognize you don't always have the opportunity to just tag someone else in, but check in on those things. Is this not working right? Sometimes it's as simple as, let's end the meeting and restart it. And oftentimes that's enough to just kind of reset the game and get ourselves back to working well. Go ahead and use the chat box now, and please share with us some of the tools that you are using to engage kids virtually. I'm going to circle back to this. I'm going to talk on the next slide while you guys have a chance to chat some of those things in. And I want to hear from you. What's working well for you? What different tools, activities, online games, online videos, or other things, what's working well for you? And this is something, make sure that you have all panelists and attendees here, because I think this is something that can really help everybody. The folks yesterday had a lot of real good examples that I learned from, some things that I didn't know about that I'm going to totally steal and use. Right? So this next slide then, as you guys go ahead and think about that and chat that in, this is about how do we tweak that for teens and tweens, right? So we want to recognize that we're using virtual environments that teens and tweens are comfortable with, there's a decent chance that many of the teenagers that you are serving are going to be more comfortable with more online environments than you are, and that is okay, right? I liken it to the quote from one of the Batman movies where Bane says, you know, you adopted the dark, but I was born in it, right? And I think about that with technology. Many of us are pretty good with technology, but we weren't born into it, right? There were not iPads when I was born, and probably when many of you were born, but that's not true for my 6-year-old, who, as much as I've fought it, is pretty darn good at operating an iPad, even though he's 6, right? And so we recognize that teens are growing up in a different tech age, and they might be more comfortable in some of these settings than we are. We can also take advantage of other digital domains as long as they are safe and we consider them safe, and work with kids and their families to make sure. But one example that I came up recently in a story I was reading online, there's a tech company out in California that is, you know, obviously everybody's working from home right now, and so they've been holding staff meetings in a video game. That particular story that I read, it was the game Red Dead Redemption, which is set in the Old West. And so everybody would log in with their character. They had a private game server, so it was just their company, and they all sat around a virtual campfire and had their staff meeting. And I thought that was a really cool idea, right? We're not necessarily encouraging you to join public games with your kids and try to have important private conversations, but are there ways to use, you know, an online checkers game, an online, you know, private Roblox or Minecraft session, and do a little kind of creative work with kids while still continuing our conversation with them, right? So, and always be thinking, when we're talking about teens, these are kids whose brains are in flux, whose bodies are in flux, who are going through emotional, physical, and intellectual changes, and that hasn't stopped just because everybody is living their lives from their living room now. So we're going to see fluctuations in emotion, fluctuations in intellectual capacity. We're going to have kids that can really focus in and be locked in one day, and the next day are just not having any of it, right? So we want to be ready for, how do we acknowledge that? And again, we want to be recognizing that some of the nonverbals that we might use in the quote unquote real world, the in-person world, might not always work as well online. So we need to be more animated with our nods, right? With our checking in, with acknowledging verbally, oh, when I said that, you made a frowny face. Like, it looked to me like that frustrated you when I said that. Or when you told me that part of the story, your face lit up with a big smile, right? We want to be recognizing the emotions that we're seeing, the responses that we're seeing, and help clue kids into the fact that we are reading them and we are processing and staying on the line with them. Go ahead to the next one, Susie.
Did you want to double back and look at some of the strategies folks are using with kids?
Yeah, so let's talk about a few of those. I'm scrolling through those now. Christy mentioned her organization is actually doing like a monthly family engagement event using Zoom, and you do bingo games, and that's really interesting. I'm curious to learn more about that. Is that per family, or are you actually bringing many families together and kind of doing a virtual town hall kind of setting with a bingo game? That's a really cool thing, and bingo is a great game that can sort of be played more easily sort of online and virtually, right? Rachel talks about some tips for virtual learning, taking frequent breaks, which we've talked about a bunch, encouraging kids to go outside and get some fresh air and maybe come back, depending on technology and safety, even taking the laptop or the iPad or whatever outside, right, and having a meeting. That's great. Jolene mentions folks have been having some success playing games. There's a free draw option to play Pictionary or word games. Those can be great ways to get kids intellectually stimulated and get them thinking, which helps get them talking, right? There are Zoom drawing pictures over Zoom. Special guests. My children or my child's teacher has been doing a lot of special guests. Somebody new to come in and read a book, or you know, parents with interesting jobs and things that will pop into Zoom and talk about their jobs. That can be a fun way. Musical guests can be really fun. Somebody playing a guitar or a piano over Zoom can be a lot of fun, right? Different ways to show off skills. Zoom dance party, somebody mentioned that yesterday, Francis just mentioned it now. Kristen is talking about, and this is a good point to bring up, right? Having a kid who can't be alone with technology due to maybe some of his inappropriate behaviors that he might be engaging with, or some risks that might exist to that child in the online world. So she says when he needs to tell me something that he doesn't want mom to hear, he types it in. And then because he uses headphones, his workers can talk to him about his question, right? So that's a great point we haven't really mentioned. We can use the chat feature, right? If kids don't feel comfortable giving their side of the conversation verbally, they can give it via text. And if they're wearing headphones, we can continue to talk back at them, and they're not as worried that others can overhear what we're saying. That's a really great example. And there's a number of others. I'm not going to read them all, but you folks can hopefully all see those and utilize those, because those are real good. And we're also, when we put together, we're probably going to put together a little information sheet with all the answers to questions and comments that you have. We're going to save all these comments and kind of put those together and have those available when we share the video of this training as well. So thank you all for that. I'm going to hand over to Susie.
So before we move on to self-care, we just want to give a little nod to two really particularly challenging pieces of assessment in general, but particularly assessment in a virtual world. So we have this issue of sensitive information, right? That's part of our assessment process. And we want to know that we have to approach challenging topics sometimes virtually. There are things that are really important for us to know about. So let's start with you. Chat into me, what are some of the topics that you find toughest to talk about with a youth or the caregiver, and maybe even some that have gotten tougher as you've entered into this virtual world? Lots of folks often think of particular aspects of the information they have to ask about. So what does that look like for you? What are some of the things that you might feel a little anxiety about? You might be unsure how to broach a topic. You might be unsure what words to use. You might be worried, right? So Jody started out the conversation, and Ed added to that, talking about trauma and abuse being tough to talk about. Monique says sometimes it's very hard to ask about sexually reactive behaviors. Kyle says some of the risk behaviors like suicide or suspicion of substance abuse or trauma. Takara says if there are personal triggers or subjects of conversation that the caregiver has been through abuse and they're triggered by that. More people are saying trauma. Kirsten is saying asking about alcoholism with the caregiver. Susan says that some children and parents are very uncomfortable discussing problems in the home, like parenting stress. That can be difficult to ask about. Daquan says asking a child about their relationship with their birth parents can be tough because trauma can be triggering. And lots of folks are bringing up ACEs, family substance abuse, suicidality. Domestic violence can be tricky. Another person is saying that caregivers fear judgment from the care manager, and so asking about the caregiver items can be difficult. Talking to younger kids about sexual information or family relationships and conversations about mental health, right? And lots of folks are entering in. Someone else, Monique, is saying just explaining some of the items can be challenging. So like many of you, right, most folks find this subject list to be at the top of sensitivity around assessment, right? So obviously talking about trauma, for some folks talking about culturally sensitive items like money or religion, talking about substance use either with a young person or with a caregiver, sexual identity, gender expression, sexually reactive behaviors, and lots more can feel really difficult to talk about. And when you're moving to a virtual environment, right, it can feel even more difficult. And so we have some strategies we want to share with you for assessing around these sensitive topics, right? First of all, don't initiate sensitive topics until rapport is built. Remember that transparency piece I talked about a little while ago. When you introduce the assessment, you might want to mention that some of these things are going to be part of the assessment, but then wait until you get to know the client and the caregiver better. When you do bring things up, we want you to remember to normalize it. And by normalizing it, you can say it in a way that makes it clear that you ask everyone and that the experiences are not uncommon. So you can say things like, many of the kids I talk with tell me about things that happened in their life that made them feel really afraid or made them feel hurt. Has anything like that happened to you? Or another one is, most parents tell me that sometimes during their life as a parent, they feel really stressed out. Have you had times like that? And move from less personal to more personal. With kids, this is particularly important. So, for example, I often will say to a child, do you know anybody who's using drugs or alcohol? Does anybody who you're friends with or anybody at your high school ever get into trouble with the law? And that helps kids, right, start to talk about something without starting to talk about themselves. Don't shut any question down with the way you ask about it. Sometimes when we're nervous, we can ask things in a shutting down way. So if I say to a parent, do you ever drink too much, right? That's a kind of a shutdown way to ask. But if I say a lot of the parents I work with struggle sometimes with drinking getting in the way of them being the parent they want to be, does that ever happen for you? Happens for a lot of people. Ask kids about safety. We've been talking about that, right? Is it safe for you to talk about things around sexual identity and gender? Do we want to have a code word? Can we talk about it? Like I could say to you, I like boys is going to be 1. I like girls is going to be 2. I like other is going to be 3. You tell me 1, 2, or 3. And that's a way for kids to start talking about it. Always think about communicating safety non-verbally, verbally, and in the materials that you put up. I'm not sure, Josh, if this was your example, but somebody had an example of a photograph of a nuclear family in a poster on their office wall, and it made the kid and the caregiver very uncomfortable because they were a 2-parent same-sex family, but one of the parents wasn't there. Weave sensitive questions into other questions about the caregiver and other questions about the youth. Okay, so what that means is, like we've talked a lot about diversions and conversations, right? We can ask people about their lives and weave sensitive topics into their questions about their day-to-day lives. Always tell the caregiver the why. My job is to build a plan of care that helps your child meet his or her health and wellness goals and also helps you support your child in that. So I'm going to be asking you some questions about things that get in the way for you as a parent, not to judge you, right? And not to get you in trouble, but to help understand what the best approach to your child's health and wellness is going to be. Always, when people share things with you, right, remember, acknowledge their openness and their courage. I really appreciate your telling me that today. That's got to be hard to talk about sometimes. It's really brave for you to bring that up, but also validate hesitation. I see from the way that you're looking at me that you don't feel real comfortable right now. That makes a lot of sense. You don't know me that well. Let's circle back to this when we know each other a little better. And again, we can't say this enough on today's call. Really take frequent breaks, because particularly when you're assessing around difficult information, right, you want to give people those breathers. And the last piece about sensitive information can be when there's disagreement about any of the assessment information that you're trying to find collaborative agreement on. So we want to just quickly go over this idea of how do we handle disagreement and conflicting perspectives. Remember, we talked at the beginning of the webinar about being careful to ask everybody what they think. Well, collaborative rating of the action level helps build consensus. So you can actually average the rating. You can frame the disagreement by reflecting back what each person sees, and you can describe the difference in a very calm way. You don't say you don't agree, you just say, I see that this slide is blue and I like this slide, and you see that this slide is gray and you think this slide is not helpful. When we start opening up the conversation in a descriptive way, we can then build consensus. We also want to think about framing any disagreement in terms of the youth priority and the caregiver's priority. So if Johnny says he wants his parents to get off his back, and his parents say in order to do that, he needs to get a certain grade at school in math, then we might want to say to Johnny, so you don't care about math, but you're talking about wanting your parents off your back. Is there a way to approach math with that as a goal? Remember though, right, that when we're not on virtual and we're not in person, we have to try and do this without nonverbal cues. So we're going to walk you through an example of how we might use words only to build consensus around a possible disagreement. So this is Shauna and her mom. Say we're on the phone with them, right? And we have them on speakerphone. The care manager might say to Shauna, Shauna, we talked last week about missing a few days of school this past year. Would you say that for you getting to school on time is something you need to work on? And Shauna says, yeah, I guess so. Care manager asks Mom, what do you think about that? And Mom says, well, I keep getting calls from the school about it. So yeah, we need to work on it. Care manager says, okay, so you both agree we should make an action plan about this. Now just note, as the care manager answers, she's building a sense of we're working on forward motion. Then she says to Shauna, Shauna, would you say we should get going pretty soon on this, or can we do it over the next few months as a piece of our work? And Shauna says, I don't know, I've only missed 15 days this whole year. I don't think it's so bad. Now, all of us know 15 days is a lot of days to miss, but the care manager chooses to try to build consensus by saying, so that sounds like we would take action, but we don't have to do it right away. Mom, do you agree with that? When Mom says, well, I'm worried she's going to get expelled. So care manager says, Shauna, I hear Mom saying the school might get stricter about this. What do you think? Shauna says, yeah, I don't think they're expelling me anytime soon, but I could get in school suspension pretty soon. So the care manager says, well, you and your mom both say something's going to happen soon if you keep missing days. So what that tells me is this should be a focus for action right away. Are you okay with that? Yes, says Shauna. She's okay. I think this is you, Josh.
Yeah, so that's a great example to really transition to the last piece of this, which is remembering that the CANS is a communimetric tool, right? There is no real capability for us to compare every situation to every other situation, because the way this tool is meant to be is a reflection of the current situation for the current child and family, and that's okay. So reaching consensus sometimes means that we don't all agree, and we can agree to disagree, right? We arrive at, this is a tool meant to communicate and drive us towards action, drive us towards planning. So it's okay to be helping the kids and families, like in that Shauna example, try to arrive at a joint decision, but also understand that they do have different perspectives. And we also want to be bringing in and remembering that the CANS is a tool that's meant to be the community's assessment. And so that means the perspectives of extended families, of teachers, of therapists, of pediatricians and other medical professionals. A lot of these folks now are actually getting extended and deeper looks into the family lives of our kids than they ever had before, right? Teachers are learning more about how each of our homes operate than they ever really knew when our kids simply arrived on a bus and then left at 3 o'clock on a different bus, right? They're seeing who's home, they're seeing who the pets are, they're seeing what fights are taking place, right? So these folks have actually really good information to help us better understand what the needs and strengths of families might be. And so it's important that we're reaching out to all of those people and involving them in the assessment process, because this is their process too. We have the important role of collecting everything, helping build that consensus, and ultimately in putting it all into a computer somewhere. But it's all of these other folks that might know the kids and families a lot better than we do that are going to really give us that key information, right? And even in isolation, services are still happening, doctor's appointments are still happening virtually or otherwise, right? Teaching is still going on. Music teachers are still teaching through Zoom, right? Like all of those things are happening, and all of those folks can help teach us something about the kids and the family and help us better understand their story. So keep remembering that. The CANS is a communication tool. It's a tool built around community. So go ahead and do the next slide.
Oh, you want to do?
Yeah.
Me?
No, go ahead.
So we're not gonna wrap up quite yet. We have a few more resources we want to share with you, but we wanted to take pause and see if there are any questions about any of the tips, tricks, strategies, or approaches that we've shared with you so far today. You can go right to that Q&A box and put those in now, and we'll go through some of our resources for you while you think about any questions that you want to discuss before we stop today. We have a few questions that have already come in. Queen says that the best approach when a parent insists, oh, sorry, I've already answered that question. Nicole says, when care coordinators serve medically fragile children, how can we score effectively when some of our patients are nonverbal and the child might not be a solid 0 or a solid 3? Nicole, that's a great question, but it's very general, and so it becomes difficult for me to address in a general way. We're always happy to provide you, though, at the institute level with individual coaching about rating questions for individual kids. And it's important to remember that each item, right, if you cannot rate it, you rate it as no evidence, right? And so if a child is nonverbal, for example, and we can't evaluate their degree of optimism, then we can rate that optimism strength item of 3. That means there's no strength identified. Remember that when we rate something, we're not saying for sure it doesn't exist or for sure it does. We're saying at the present time, we do not have enough information to rate this anything other than no evidence, which would be a 0 for a need or a 3 for a strength. There are other questions that people have about any of the content today or any of what you're struggling with around virtual use of the CANS tool. Josh, you seen anything in Q&A? I'm looking at chat.
Did we address Yasmin's question about the IDT being done before the CANS?
No, we didn't. Do you want to do that one?
Why don't you go ahead and take that one? So the question is, should the IDT be done before the CANS? And I would encourage any of you that have more questions, go ahead and use that Q&A button. That's a great place to put them in, so that way we can dismiss them when we're done answering.
Well, it really depends on how you're running the IDT. The IDT is meant to be a meeting that elevates the voice and choice of the child and family. And so what can be really helpful is to complete the CANS with the child and family and all of the information you have, and then have a rough completed CANS to go through at the meeting. That helps organize the conversation. It also can be that you need to use the IDT meeting to fine-tune some of the items you can't yet rate, but we find it most helpful to use that meeting to support a conversation about what we're going to do with the plan of care, as opposed to an assessment conversation. However, if you have the completed CANS and the relevant item grid, which we're going to show you in some other trainings and webinars, and which you can get on the Institute website, that is a great place to start organizing the team's thinking around goal building for the plan of care. Let's see other questions. Why don't we skip to self-care, and then folks can chat in their questions and we can circle back to them, Josh.
That sounds great.
Before we let you go, we want to say, and I know you're hearing this from a lot of places, that your self-care is critical. You yourself are managing the COVID-19 situation from wherever you are. You're also, many of you, managing whatever the needs are of your own children, your family, right? And doing that in an ever-changing and somewhat ambiguous environment. And so no matter how busy we get, we have to try and take some time every day, even if it's just a few minutes, to take care of ourselves. And so we want to share these resources with you, just a few things, and I'm sure you all could share your resources with us. You can find a lot of fun, relaxing things on YouTube. Here are just a few examples. YouTube has 3 hours of nature, scenery, and music films that are just that. They're beautiful pictures of nature and relaxing music. We also found on YouTube something called The World's Most Relaxing Film, which is a beautiful visual and music film that goes on for some time and calms people down. Headspace is actually free to New Yorkers. It's an application and a website through which you can do short meditations and listen to calming music. Very, very, very easy to use. Nature Relax is a fee-for-service that you can stream through your television. Any of you who have any kind of Apple TV or Roku, it's about $9 a month, and they're beautiful live cameras that are spread all over the world in some of the world's most beautiful places. There's no music on Nature Relax, but there are very high quality nature sounds. And then finally, Insight Timer is a terrific stress management resource. It offers free and premium for-fee services and a wealth of different types of meditations, talks, music, and chanting for any interest level, any approach, and any style of relaxation. And so this will be on the slides, and we can send you this with the live links if you email us. And we wanted to make sure you know about it. And Josh is going to talk a little bit about the Institute while I take a look at the questions.
Yeah, so, Susie is the leader of, and I'm a part of the Kansas New York Institute, and that is a group made up of many partner agencies across the state and a number of CANS coaches. And we provide all sorts of support to you around the CANS, including helping you with that annual assessment that you all have to pass, and most of you are probably frustrated by. We can provide you support getting into the website, making sure you're in the right courses, and of course, overcoming any challenges you may have with earning that reliability score on the test. But more importantly, we can help with those real live in-person questions, some of which you're asking right now, but which may be popping up over time, right? In this time of COVID, we're getting lots of questions around how do we sort of assess some of the educational items, right, in this sort of new world of everybody being schooled from home. And so we are, addressing some of those individual questions that come up. Questions around, how much of a trauma is this whole experience for some of our kids, and do we rate some of the ACEs appropriately given the traumas that kids are experiencing with stay-at-home orders and things like that. And so we are talking through some of those specific questions that you may have about using the tool in practice. So you see on the screen we've broken the state into 4 regions. We have regional leads in each region, and their contact information is on the screen. And then each of those regions has a network of coaches as well. So even if the lead's not available, we can put you in touch with one of our coaches who can have some of those conversations with you and really dive in and overcome whatever challenges you may have, either on the technological and testing side or on the how do I really use this tool and use it effectively side, which again is what we're here for, is to help you be better at your job and better help the kids and families. So we have a number of questions that have been popping up. So the first question was from Kirsten, talking about many of the children are expressing behaviors that are not normal, like running away, might be triggered by homework, or not doing well overall in kind of the quarantine and stay-at-home situation. Should I be rating them on the CANS that these are happening? Some are having financial issues because of it, but it necessarily wasn't financial issues before COVID. So we would encourage you to say absolutely, right? We want to be rating. The CANS is meant to be an assessment of where we are right now and where we've been in the last 30 days, right? The recency and the immediacy is a key component and a key principle of a CANS tool. And so absolutely want to be thinking about what are many families are experiencing financial challenges now that hopefully will be alleviated as we try to get back to a normal life. But the reality is that those are challenges that are impacting folks' ability to parent, right? And so we want to recognize that we are rating all of those things. If runaways are happening more frequently, triggered by how often kids are at home, we want to be thinking about rating those for action and thinking about what actions might be taken. And just because some of the resources we might connect them to might have their own limitations due to COVID lockdowns, that doesn't necessarily mean that action isn't going to be taken and that we're not going to be connecting them to resources and letting those resources use whatever skills they have at the current moment to try to help families address those needs, right? Our job as care manager, which many of you are, is all about building those connections to the right interventions and the right services, and then helping those interventions and services develop their plans for how they're going to help the kids and families. So great question. Thank you, Kirsten.
I'll take the next one. Susan says our agency doesn't offer Zoom meetings or any other visual for communication. We're relying solely on phone conversations, and I've noticed my rapport has greatly suffered because of it. And new clients don't feel comfortable building rapport over the phone. Any suggestions? Well, Susan, this is a really challenging situation, right? You're having to build rapport and you're having to connect via the telephone. And so, one of the things I want to encourage you to do is to really slow down and break up your telephone contacts with new clients. Start with an introduction phone call and just tell them who you are and let them know that this is a challenging time and that you're here to help them, but you recognize that getting to know each other is going to be more difficult over the phone. Be collaborative. Say, are there any ideas that we can come up with that will help with this challenge that we've got going on, right? And then go back to some of those tips we put forth earlier in the webinar. Think about slowing way down, being really just conversational and checking in with where people are right now, and thinking about chunking your conversations into 15-minute sections one day, 15 minutes a day, in which you check in on the family and say, let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen next. Send some things via mail. You could send a photograph of yourself. You could send a little handwritten note that says, I'm so excited to be working with you, but I know we can meet this challenge together. Be creative in sending messages that you care. Takara says, are there activities for kids if parents don't feel comfortable with them going outdoors? Teens are very bored but need something to do other than chores and work. Well, that is a question that is a really good one. There are innumerable resources online, Takara, and I would encourage you to explore YouTube, because there are lots of things that are being streamed live that are activity oriented, right? Kids can use their smartphones, if they have them, to make videos about their lives. Kids can make photo journals, they can sketch, right? But I would go online, because there are innumerable games, activities, family activities that you can put into play. And I'm happy, Takara, if you reach out to me separately to give you some of those URLs and get you straight to some of those ideas. And then Kirsten Newby is saying many of the children are expressing more abnormal behaviors for them, running away, being triggered by homework, and not doing well in quarantine. Should I be rating them on the cans? Yes, you should. Josh, did you already answer that? No. Yeah, you should be rating them, but you should also understand these behaviors are expressions of anxiety and stress, but we need to address them because they're happening now. And so you should rate them in the past 30 days. The highest level of need, right, is what you should rate them. And then Lori is saying, any ideas for families without computers and smartphones? Lori, I would go back to that telephonic section of our webinar today, and what I just said a few minutes ago to Susan about lots of small conversational contacts. Snail mail is an option, sending things ahead of time, including visuals in what you snail mail to people, so that at least if you can't look at each other, you're looking at the same piece of information from two different telephones.
I would also encourage all of you to be in constant contact with the supervisors and managers that you work with about what are the current expectations and allowances that your agency might permit. And the state is sort of reopening regionally, and so there are different sort of things being permitted in different regions. But based on your risk tolerance, your agency's risk tolerance, and what the state guidance is, there may be times when sitting, in a backyard 6 feet apart from each other could be permitted, right? Or being at a park and being on 2 park benches across from each other could be permitted. Again, speaking with your supervisor, speaking with your agency, making sure that everyone is adhering to the guidance coming from our Department of Health and the governor and everywhere, but thinking about what are ways to replicate some of those in-person behaviors that we used to be able to use so effectively, especially in those situations where families are technologically not able to do some of what we've been training on today.
We just want to thank you for spending some time with us today. Remind you to hang in there. You're doing such important work supporting kids and families across our state. And our emails are on this last slide, as well as the CANS Institute URL where you can find regional coaches. Feel free to reach out to us. Let us know if you have other web-based training needs that we can be helpful with. And please remember, utilize those coaches. They're there for you for all things CANS. And have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.